Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another the Migraine Mentors Minicast. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Erik Reis, with my amazing partner, Dr. Thompson Maesaka. Thompson, say hi to the cam.
Hi to the cam.
Lovely. And we are here to talk about a topic that is not only near and dear to both of us, but to our patients. And we want to talk today about stress. The holidays are coming up, whether you love your family or you don't, and everything in between. I think stress is just something that's so inevitable for all of us. And it's especially relevant to those who struggle with migraine and migraine symptoms. So, what we wanted to do is we wanted to touch on stress, the good, the bad, and the ugly about it, because there's a reason we have it. There's also a reason why so many people are sick today because of it. So, Thompson, anything that you would like to kick us off with regards to talking about stress and how you kind of approach things on the clinical side?
Yeah, if you're listening to this specifically in the context of migraine, one thing you have to realize about it is migraine, again, personal opinion, is perhaps the most stressful condition. And what I mean, they did a study about what makes things stressful. And the top two factors that make something really stressful is that it is unpredictable and it's something you don't feel like you have a lot of control over. So with migraine, sometimes the most random stuff will trigger an attack. And when you do have an attack, if you're only relying on medication, you feel like your sense of control is kind of handed off to the doctor that gave you the medication. So if you don't have a collection of things to do on your own, you don't feel like you have a strong sense of control over when they happen. You have to manage stress just because migraine stress is just baked into the condition itself. So I think this is a great conversation to have. I always start my migraine patients with that as saying, hey, it's not your fault that you have migraine, but it is your responsibility to manage some of these stressors. So if you don't have a deliberate toolbox of stress management things, that's what we're here to teach you and hopefully give you some resources that you haven't heard of.
It's an interesting topic of discussion because I think so many people look at stress as such a bad thing, and we've really demonized stress uh, on like the precipice of the fact that it is bad. But stress is actually a really good thing for us, right? So, Thompson, if you and I were sitting in a room and all of a sudden somebody came in with like a mask on, saying, "Hey, like give me your wallet and keys," like we would amount to stress response in a very healthy, appropriate manner because our brains are telling us, hey, something is going on. There's no need for you and I to have an immune system that functions very well in that time of crisis. There's no need for us to have adequate like balance for our cognition and focus. Like we really need to like either get out or get ready for a fight. The whole fight, flight, or kind of freeze opportunity that we would talk about in a stress response. I think the other thing too is that response would be appropriate for that short time period of when that stressor was actually there. But once that time period is gone, or the stimulus is gone, our brains, theoretically speaking, should be able to go right back to having that kind of neutral, cool, calm collective. And I think this is where most people kind of get a bit lost is like, they're like, okay, well, stress is bad. Well, it's not all stress is bad. Some stressors are good. Like when you go to the gym, you tear down muscle and you build it back up. So the next time you encounter the same stressor, your body can adapt. It's the chronic, long lasting, unenduring stress that really takes people out of the game. And I know you've worked with a lot of patients in this state, and I have as well. There's always this battle between like how to manage stress, what are good stressors. And from a therapy standpoint, it's not always easy for us to navigate that. What is your hierarchy of kind of going through and prioritizing things from a stress management or stressor perspective? Like, can you give people just a little bit of insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of modifiable stressors and non-modifiable stressors. So things you can change and things you can't. So I try and go after the stuff that you can change first. First, just asking, okay, what are your coping mechanisms for stress? What do you do either preemptively before the stress happens or after the stress happens to make yourself feel better? And just get a sense for, okay, is there an active coping strategy or passive? Meaning, do you do things like meditation or journaling or sleep hygiene, or do you rely more on, oh, have a glass of wine or watch TV or just kind of surf? That gives us a pretty good foundation to say, okay, we need to lay the foundation of active coping skills. And I know you're big on this, Erik. I'd love to hear your take on it. I always start with sleep. because it's the easiest thing to get the most amount of results. Is that pretty similar to where you start as well?
Yeah, I've just realized, not only for myself, but for so many patients, I can do all of the therapies, all the protocols. I can do everything from diet, nutrition, get them to exercise. But if they're not sleeping, they're just not recovering. I mean, we know so much more about sleep. And not only is it restorative for your brain and body, but it's literally the moment where your brain kind of takes the trash out throughout the day and like cleans and kind of cleanses your brain from broken down proteins, structural entities, stuff like that. Consolidation of memories. So the things you learned today, what's important, what's not important, get rid of the stuff that doesn't matter, but keep the stuff that does. Throw it from your hippocampus to the frontal lobe, right? Like keep these things. And then more importantly, too, like there's such a massive component of sleep on our mental health. And it's a two-way street, right? So if you, let's say, struggle with depression, you're probably somebody who doesn't sleep very well. Well, if you don't sleep very well, you're also going to be somebody who probably struggles more with mental health issues like depression. It's such a two-way street. So if I can knock anything out in the beginning, it's the massive fundamental element of sleep. After that, it's just stacking habits, right?
Yeah.
So you and I, massive fans of James Clear, those just tiny steps to take about what can you do next? What can you do next? And as you start stacking these on top, you start getting just these exponential benefits. And so, the way I've practiced has changed so much in the last decade because it's had to, right? Just because I've realized there are better things to do. But I've really gone back to the fundamentals. If I can get somebody sleeping better, I know that they're going to be better off regardless of what they're coming in for. The next step is then looking into, hey, are there like basic physical exercises you can do, like low grade cardio? And then after that, it's really where we start getting really niched, really focused, really specific. So I'd be curious to hear your take on anything else you've add to that.
Yeah, the other two big issues, one we'd like to look at is how stress affects estrogen metabolism. So it's a big deal because stress is usually associated with a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is made from a molecule called DHEA. Problem is DHEA also gets converted into estrogen. So if you have an incredibly stressful lifestyle that's chronically taking DHEA and converting it into cortisol, the pathway that makes your estrogen can become disrupted and deficient. So when you have a cycle, those estrogen levels tank, and that will reliably trigger a pretty wicked migraine. If anyone out there listening has menstrual migraines and that's happening, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are also a ton of other really, I guess, sort of sneaky sources of stress, like a spouse that doesn't get it or a boss that doesn't get it. And those aren't necessarily things that you have a whole lot of control over. So having that conversation with, okay, well, what are some of the other stresses? Like, does your husband get it? Is he supportive, or does he call them headaches and just kind of shrug them off and call you a lazy,
Yeah.
weenie? Those are stressful things that absolutely matter in the presentation. So I always ask those questions early on as well to just get a viewpoint of, okay, where's the emotional stress at? Where is the hormonal stress coming from? Where are the lifestyle stressors coming from? Another thing that doesn't really get talked about is what happens when you go hypoglycemic, when your blood sugar drops. The body interprets that as dangerous. And so it uses a stress response, a physical stress response, to pull sugar out of your liver and muscle tissue, which your adrenal system doesn't care if it's coming from low blood sugar or an unsupportive spouse. A stress response is a stress response,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of the reasons why food early on in a migraine case is just so important, not only to reduce the histamine load, to reduce some of the triggers that most people will have done already, but just to avoid those stress responses to pull sugar out is huge. I've seen absolutely dramatic reductions in migraine intensity just from eating in a way that stabilizes blood sugar. Erik, I'd be curious to see in that first visit, what are some of the questions, and where do you want to see where stress is coming from?
Well, I'm always asking patients. This is the one question I'll always ask patients, like, what does a normal day look like for you? What are you doing? What are you eating? Like, when are you doing it? So they can just tell me and be like, oh, I always have to start my morning off with a coffee. Otherwise, I'm so grouchy and I'm not fun to be around. And I'm like, okay, bookmark that, right? And then they're like, I have to eat. Or I get dressed for the day and then I'm like on the go and I'm trying to get to work and then I'm getting to work, but then I have the first meeting, which is always with my boss. And so I'm always just tagging like not only where are stress responses, but like how do you handle them? And then what do you use as a coping mechanism to handle them? So it's the patient telling me their story. I'm always going to spend more time listening to them because they know way more about themselves than I do. But then I can extract relevant things to show them and say, okay, well, listen, you told me this. What happens if you change it? Right. So I have a case in the office right now, and she is a chronic migraine patient. She also gets a ton of tension headaches just because she's in a stressful job. She's a social worker with a police academy. So she's like got all of this stuff going on, and she's got just a really interesting background. But she's a great example of this. She would eat out like 3 times a day. Like she would literally never cook meals at home. And so over the last couple of months, like even before we started work in the office, I was like, hey, you need to get this under control. So she's eating out less. She's not perfect, but she had a streak like 4 weeks ago where she didn't eat out at all for 3 days. And I was like, that's huge. That's a massive win for your gut microbiome, for your nutrients, for your brain, for your sleep. Like we've been doing so many things like prehabbing her before we actually do the rehab. And there's a great case study that you wrote up today too for our newsletter that's being published tomorrow about, just how this all kind of goes and how it looks functionally. But she's a great candidate for that. Now, she's got a ton of visual stuff going on, musculoskeletal stuff for sure. But on top of that, she's somebody who is so reactive with her blood sugar. So I'm literally having her fast now. So every morning she doesn't eat until 9. Now we're at 10 o'clock this week. Next week will be 11. Now she's a female who still menstruates, and you have to be careful with the fasting because those sometimes can be hard for women depending on where they're at in their cycle and how they are hormonally. But I use it all the time. And when people start responding and they feel better, like I'll double down. If I kind of hit that pause button where I'm like, okay, you're not responding the way I want you to, like then we'll do a Dutch test or we'll do something to intervene. But blood sugar is huge. People forget how reactive blood glucose is in your arteries and veins. Like it'll literally tear down arteries and nerves. That's why you get diabetic neuropathy. That's why you get diabetic retinopathy. That's why Alzheimer's is considered the type 3 diabetes. So there's a lot to be said about that. So Thompson, with that said, I know we only have a short amount of time to talk about some of this stuff, and this will be a continuous conversation we have. For somebody out there who is struggling right now with migraine and dealing with a ton of stress or perceived stressors, can you just maybe give them like some parting advice or words of wisdom about where they are today, but where they could actually end up in the future?
Yeah, one thing I did in my personal life that made a huge difference in how I cope with stress is I had somebody ask me to write down a list, well, 2 lists, one of active ways that I manage stress and cope with it, and then one of passive. And the whole goal of it was to show you, hopefully, that you have more active strategies than passive. Those tend to be a little bit more constructive and less of an escape, kind of just a numb out. And what I found was that I had considerably more passive ways I cope with stress than active. And that led to the realization of I should really be more proactive about this. And then that led to meditation. And then meditation led to journaling. This is like early in my 20s. And then meditation led to sleep hygiene, and then sleep hygiene led to it just sort of snowballed out of control into this wonderful collection of stress management, which has
I
really
like
made
that.
a difference in how resilient I show up as, and just the general overall demeanor. So if you're out there, I would first list all the ways that you cope and then break that list into active and passive. And then if you have more passive than active, start adding stuff to that column is where I would start. That has been arguably some of the best advice I've ever been given.
There
What
you
about
go.
you,
Yeah,
Eric?
those are great actionable takeaways. I honestly, same thing. I figured out what would work for me. So, I love starting my mornings off with a workout. That has always been something that I've stuck through, especially over the last probably like 7 years of my life. I've just realized when I get up, my body's ready to go. I go for a workout. Like the rest of the day seems so much easier because I've done something physically demanding. So anytime I get something emotionally or mentally demanding, I'm like, this isn't as bad as it could have been if this was the first kind of toad that I had to like eat for the day, right? So outside of that, honestly, just having a purpose, making sure I'm surrounded by people who push me, drive me, but support me, and then at the end of the day too, I always take time for myself. So I've gotten a little bit selfish as I've gotten older, and I think that's been helpful to be a little bit more selfless. So I've just taken that opportunity to run with it. So much like you, it's all that self exploration, right? So, and those are super powerful parting words. So thank you for everybody who's joining us. Once again, we are the Migraine Mentors, and this is the Migraine Mentors Minicast. We're excited to bring this to you. And if you want to go and sign up for our newsletter, the link is below this video. So go ahead and sign up for it. You'll get the actual newsletter sent out to you. But if not, you get to enjoy the podcast here on YouTube. So we'll see you at the next episode.